By the mid-16th century, the Spanish Empire held a terrifying monopoly on global power. Fueled by endless shipments of New World gold and silver, Spain boasted an army and navy of unimaginable scale. But if you look at a map of this sprawling empire, way up on its northern edge, you'll find the Low Countries. This was a tiny, swamp-filled region, built entirely on local trade and merchant shipping. Trouble started when the new Spanish king, Philip II, began managing this distant merchant hub from Madrid. He imposed heavy taxes on the locals and aggressively persecuted the region's rapidly growing Protestant population. To enforce his will, Philip sent a specialized tribunal. The Dutch called it the Blood Council. As this contemporary etching shows, they systematically arrested local nobles and executed thousands of dissidents to crush the growing resistance. Facing systemic execution, an unlikely local leader, the German-born nobleman William of Orange, decided to fight back and rally the disjointed local provinces. This was a collection of merchants and local militias deciding to declare war on the largest, wealthiest, and most technologically advanced military machine on Earth. They were outmanned, outgunned, and outfunded. In a traditional land battle, the Dutch stood absolutely zero chance. The elite Spanish infantry, known as tercios, fought with tightly packed pikes and heavy armor, completely dominating open battlefields. So the rebels turned to the ocean. They deployed fleets of privateers and pirates, affectionately called the Sea Beggars, to wage a relentless naval guerrilla campaign, capturing key Spanish-held ports along the coast. But naval victories couldn't save inland cities. In 1574, a Spanish army completely surrounded the city of Leiden, trapping the citizens inside and slowly starving them into submission. To break the siege, the Dutch initiated a massive, desperate geographic sacrifice. They deliberately opened the coastal sluice gates, the very barriers protecting their country from the sea, and flooded their own valuable agricultural land. As the tide washed over the farms, the water levels rose high enough for the sea beggar fleets to sail miles inland. They arrived right at the city walls of Leiden, delivering supplies and forcing the Spanish forces to retreat. By destroying their own territory and weaponizing the ocean, the Dutch proved that a smaller force could outmaneuver overwhelming military size. Guerrilla tactics kept the rebellion alive, but winning the war required taking territory back. William's son, Maurits of Nassau, understood that raw rebel enthusiasm would continually lose to Spanish discipline in a pitched battle. Maurits decided to overhaul his forces. Instead of treating his soldiers like a traditional medieval militia, he approached the army like an engineer. He standardized their equipment and forced them to practice rigorous, repetitive drilling. This diagram illustrates his innovation, volley fire. Maurits organized his musketeers into deep ranks. The front row fires simultaneously, then steps to the rear to reload. The next rank steps forward to shoot. This continuous rotation maintains a relentless, precise wall of lead. This system allowed the Dutch infantry to shatter traditional formations. At battles like Newport, this newly drilled force shocked Europe by holding their ground and eventually routing seasoned Spanish veterans. By refining this process, Maurits helped transform the Dutch forces from a reactive militia into a professional institution. It was a pivotal moment in the development of modern warfare, using standardized drilling to level the playing field against the most disciplined armies in Europe. Keeping tens of thousands of professional soldiers drilled, equipped, and paid created a massive new problem.
Waging an indefinite war against a global empire is incredibly expensive. Spain financed its war machine directly from royal coffers filled with South American gold. The Dutch rebels didn't have a king, and they certainly didn't have gold mines. They had to find a different way to generate capital. In 1602, they engineered a financial solution. They established the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. It allowed everyday merchants and citizens to buy private shares, effectively crowdsourcing the wealth of the entire republic. By selling these shares, the VOC generated enough capital to build massive private armadas. These heavily armed merchant fleets sailed across the globe, systematically capturing Spanish and Portuguese colonial outposts from Brazil to Indonesia. To fund their survival, the Dutch created the first modern multinational corporation and launched the first public stock exchange. They fought the Spanish Empire by weaponizing capitalism. By the early 1600s, the war had ground into a brutal, expensive stalemate. While Spain remained a formidable power, the combined pressure of multiple state bankruptcies, global corporate raids, and the resilience of the Dutch defense made the cost of total victory unsustainable. In 1609, the two sides finally sat down at the negotiating table. They signed a 12-year ceasefire, which effectively forced the mighty Spanish Empire to recognize an independent Dutch state. The political conclusion to all this is incredibly ironic. For years during the rebellion, the Dutch had desperately offered sovereignty to French and English royals, begging for a king or queen to protect them. Every attempt failed. Left entirely to their own devices, the Dutch soon realized they possessed a fully functioning, highly profitable state. They didn't actually need a monarch to run it, and simply decided to govern themselves. What began as a regional protest over heavy taxes and religious persecution evolved into a 40-year fight for survival. By innovating on the battlefield and in the financial markets, the Dutch built an economic engine that would dominate the century and accidentally forged Europe's first modern republic.